Welcome back to this latest episode of Japan's Top Business Interviews. I'm your host, Dr. Greg Story, the president of Dale Carnegie Training, Tokyo, Japan. My special guest today is James Yamanaka, who is the president of BAT Japan. James, welcome.
Good to have you.
Thank you. And you've obviously been in this job a little while now. How long have you been running the organization here?
Yeah, I'm coming up on 3 years now in a few months. Yeah.
Okay, great. So how is it that you're in Japan, running BAT in Japan? How have you sort of gotten to this point in your career?
Yeah, it's been sort of a long journey all the way through. I'm Japanese American, so I grew up in California, and I actually ended up going to business school in London. Started my career in consulting, and mostly in telecom, and somehow I ended up being in BAT for about 18 years now. And it was one of those things where I worked in consulting for BAT as a client in the Middle East close to 22 years ago. And since then have just taken on progressive roles, starting in London, moving to Germany, Hong Kong, Sri Lanka, back to London. And then I ran the business in the Nordics in Europe, and then was appointed here 3 years ago.
Wow, you're BAT through and through.
Yeah.
And that consulting job, that was with one of the big agencies? Or
I started off with Deloitte Consulting
Deloitte,
in London, and then I was with another smaller Spanish company, so a Catalan company called, back then it was called Cluster, and I think it's now part of one of the other big consultancies, Oliver Wyman. It's part of Oliver Wyman now. Yeah.
So what are you, Nisei, Sansei, Yonsei? What generation of Japanese American are you?
Yeah, I'm a Yonsei.
Yonsei, okay, so you've been there a long time, fourth generation. And so when you were growing up, was it one of those things of we're going to all become Americans here and we're going to speak English at home and no Japanese, or were you sort of growing up bilingually at home?
No, I think it was probably the former. So there's four of us, 4 kids, and I think none of us really speak any Japanese. My parents attempted to teach us, but I think, as kids growing up as not really immigrants, we were already 4th generation, but we wanted to be
fit in.
Yeah, fit in, and wanted to be American, even though my neighborhood was heavily Japanese. I grew up in Torrance, which is a very Japanese part of LA.
In LA, right?
Yeah.
I noticed with my son when he was younger going to school here, it'd be like, the parents would come along and watch the class. He was never happy when I turned up because every other kid is Japanese. And then I turn up and I'm obviously not Japanese, so I can understand that need to fit in. So when you were in BAT, at some point they said to you, James, Japan, how about running Japan? What was going through your mind there? Were you thinking, great, or how was your reaction to that idea?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was actually all, kind of excited and a bit worried at the same time. One was, although I'm ethnically Japanese, I've never lived or worked here in my life. So part of it was just an exciting thing from a personal point of view to be able to come to Japan, to learn a little bit about where my family came from.
Do you still have family here somewhere in Japan?
Very, very distant. The kind of relatives that there's no name for.
Right.
Because they're so distant. So if you ask how you're related, we're related. There's nothing more beyond that I can really say.
That, right. So it's really distant.
So very, very distant, yeah. But there are some. But my family's from Hiroshima and Okayama on the mother and father side.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, nice country down there.
Yeah.
And so when you get the job, come to Japan, so you arrive and, you've had a great experience in Europe. You've grown up in the States. You've worked in the Middle East. I mean, you're a really, well-seasoned executive by the time you get here. So what things did you notice when you first arrived? Do you think, that's a bit different, or not sure about that, or that's a bit not what I expected? What were the sort of things that surprised you a little bit about leading the team here in Japan?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things, when I landed here, the first day I came to Japan, the kind team I work with now, got me to the town hall meeting, which is sort of our annual big meeting that we have with all of the company around. So it was in Osaka, and I think there were probably 850 people or more in the room. And they tell me, we need you to do a speech to 850.
This is day one?
This is day one.
Barely off the plane. Okay, James, big speech, 800 people, whole team, away you go.
Absolutely. And they tell me to go in there and do this speech. They give me a deck, and it's about some of the cultural changes they want in the company. So it came from my predecessor, and I'm supposed to be talking about this. And it wasn't the fact of speaking in front of a big audience that was the issue. It was just the reaction you get in a Japanese crowd versus a crowd you would get in Europe or other parts of the world.
And the reaction in Japan would be?
Deathly silent.
Deathly silence and no reaction.
Absolutely no reaction to anything other than polite clapping. And also because it was translated as well, because I don't speak English. The thing I had to get used to was sort of communicating without any humor.
Right.
Or humor that's going to take 3 seconds to actually get through. But I remember it was quite an experience of not knowing anybody,
Right.
Not being able to connect because you don't know anyone in the room, and just deathly silence. The most quiet 850 people I've ever presented to in my life. I have to say it was a bit daunting on day one, other than the few expats around who gave me sort of polite laughs along the way. Yeah.
Right. Well, I mean, I guess for any executive, it's not often you get to speak to 850 people in one venue. Anyway, most business speeches are usually, public speeches a bit smaller than that. In-house, I guess it might be possible. It's not that often you get to do that, right?
Yeah.
So that in itself is a bit of a unique proposition, isn't it? And so, okay, nice. Welcome to Japan, James. Straight into the 850-person speech. So after that, apart from that, you start to sort of, settle down and get the lay of the land a little bit, and you start to notice how the company worked here compared to how it worked elsewhere, because you've been in the company, I think you said 18 years.
Yeah.
So you've got BAT in your veins, you know how it works. What little things you notice a little bit different about how Japan runs?
I think there's a number of things that sort of pop out to you at the beginning, and they come out over time as well. Some of the things are, you realize that there are lots of things that you assume people want that they don't actually want here. And to give you a few examples, we talk about things like empowerment a lot in the West, right? And I think there is some, people here do want it. At the same time, there's a lot of people that don't want it, meaning, because empowerment comes with the flip side, which is do something new that you don't know how to do and expect it to go right. There is a bit of a culture of, you don't want to fail in front of the senior people. So that was one thing. I realized some of the things.
There's also no translation for the word empowerment.
Exactly.
Which is a bit of a pain. Empowermental. Doesn't help, right? And then also you've got that accountability piece too, right? Because yes, you're empowered, but now you're accountable.
Yeah.
And, for a lot of workers in Japan, that accountability bit, no, I'll pass on that one. So I can understand that would have been a bit tricky.
And that one was that. Two was things like I said, it's related to that first speech I did. There is enthusiasm, but it's shown in a different way.
Right.
And I think you need to figure out, you can't expect, teams to react in the same way that they do in other parts of the world. And it took a while to understand that it wasn't going to work that way. You're never going to get sort of, and not just in big audience speeches, but in different sorts of ways, getting that sort of rah-rah enthusiasm doesn't really happen here in the same way as it would in other countries. It doesn't mean they don't believe it.
Does it happen in Europe? I mean, my impression is that sort of rah-rah enthusiasm, I'm Australian, so probably it'll work down there. I know it works in America, it's sort of home of rah-rah enthusiasm. Yeah. But I mean, if you think about it, you spent a lot of time in Europe too. Yeah. My image, I haven't worked in Europe, but my image is a bit more demure, maybe a little bit less understated than maybe, say, American culture. So was there that big a contrast between, say, your experiences outside of States compared to here?
Yeah, it is. What I would say is in Europe, there's sort of the US, which is one extreme, meaning the rah-rah. And I remember I did training for Deloitte after having been living in Europe for quite some time. And going back to the American was in your face to rah-rah. And Europe is somewhere in the middle, and it depends which country as well, right? So even in Denmark, which I was there for 5 years, the Scandinavians are known to be a little bit more, not quite as, rah-rah, not quite as outgoing as a lot of their Southern European colleagues. But you get them in the right space, you can joke, and you can actually get a lot of that team spirit and bonding and a little noise, put it that way. And then, Japan is pretty much the opposite of that. So on a scale, Japan sort of fits in one part. And again, it doesn't mean that they're not committed, excited, wanting to deliver. It's just the way it's expressed. It's very different. And you need to get used to it and to find out how to read the signals that they're actually enjoying it. And it takes a while, I think.
So what are some other things you noticed apart from the things we've talked about so far?
I think there's also, when you try to do it in Japan, especially when, we're a company now that has gone through major changes over the past, 5 years. 5 years ago, this was an entirely cigarette business, very traditional, very predictable. I mean, it's an industry which before you could probably predict your volumes and your market share at the 1% off in either direction sort of level. And then about 5 years ago, when we launched Glow, which is the heated tobacco product, it completely changed the entire nature of the business because you had, from a company that had no ability to do advertising except for on, convenience stores. With the devices, you can do digital marketing. You can do so many more things that you couldn't do before.
And more of a conventional business, I guess.
Yeah, more like a different sort of consumer company. A normal consumer company rather than the very regulated cigarette business. And that also required a lot less precision, meaning you suddenly could no longer predict everything year on year. You were suddenly doing things in a different way and asking your teams here to create things rather than do the process the way we've always done it and do it well. And that I think was a big cultural change here in Japan. And that was something that I noticed from a management point of view. It is, Japan, I think in general, and this is certainly a generalization because it's not everybody, but there is discomfort with change. Everywhere has it, but Japan in some ways I think sees it, you experience it even more when you make radical changes. And again, I think some of that has to do with that unwillingness to fail in public. Yeah.
So that process had already started by the time you've arrived, right? So it's on, I guess, if you say 5 years ago, it was probably 2 years into it then by the time you arrived. So you were sort of moving that along. But I guess knowing Japan, even it being around for 2 years, it probably hadn't been embraced quite yet. We're still studying it, we're still thinking about that. So what did you find it was challenging to get people to actually maybe speed up their embrace of it or become a bit more wholehearted in their embrace of it?
I think at the beginning I probably made the mistake of doing a lot of things that I would have done in other jobs, other jobs outside of Japan. So, say when I made changes in Denmark, a lot of it was another social activity to get people through, give a lot of power to the team to come up with whatever they wanted. And honestly, the return was pretty much zero when I first did it. And
when you did that here, you mean?
Yeah, we tried it at the beginning.
Worked in Denmark, but
did not work here.
Just not happening, right?
At all. And I probably, I think I shouldn't say our team, we decided to take a bit more radical approach and to see what happened. So, again, just actually until the middle of last year, this company was very traditionally structured. We had a marketing director, finance director. We were organized in a very linear way. And what I mean by that is because the cigarette industry was so stable, we had a team who did insights. They passed it off to the brand team who did some of the visuals, who passed it off to the activation team to figure out which channels, who handed it off to the field force who did the planning. And when we are working like that, especially the more digital you work, it's just too slow. Yeah. And there's not enough room for innovation. It becomes a process game. So at April Fool's Day last year, we completely reorganized the organization. And now we're organized by categories in agile teams. What I mean by that is like there's a team that looks after the heated tobacco product and one consumer segment. And within that team, you have about 11 people from every different function. Right. They have complete autonomy within, some areas to hit these targets for that consumer group, and they run. So this was sort of a radical way of trying to change the culture and, in effect, force a change and getting people to adapt to it. And it was a mix of sort of expats and locals as well. And the idea was really to put the empowerment on these teams, to force some innovation because there's no rules on how to work this way, and to try to get them comfortable with not just change, but making it work. And so it's been an experiment now of almost a year.
So that's interesting. Yeah. I mean, the process problem that you talked about is not specific to Japan. I'm sure. No. I bet that's BAT globally.
Yes.
So did you become a type of test bed for BAT globally to rearrange the workforces, or this has just been a sort of Japan thing?
I think Japan, BAT Japan is very much the test bed for almost everything we do in BAT right now.
Is that right?
Yeah,
Wow.
just because
That's
we were the
amazing.
first with the heated products.
Yeah,
We
okay.
probably have gotten the furthest in terms of digital marketing, with the exception of maybe our US business. And we were the ones who felt the pain of the old way of working first. So it was, partially from a leadership point of view, but partially from just a practical, how do you make it work? How do you get the speed? How do you get people to innovate? How do you take, me out of the equation for most? If you're waiting for me for all the ideas, it'll never happen. So how do you push that down? So we're very much sort of the test. And now, I think the rest of the group, not just this, but other things, will follow us a lot in what we do. Because, it's not theoretical. We need to make it work. Yeah.
No, and it's
Yeah.
also, I mean, in a given team, you've got a hierarchy, right, of who joined at what time and who's senior to who and
Yeah.
blah, 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 and suddenly you take that linear, which is basically that
Yeah.
vertical hierarchy, isn't it? And you rearrange people into a team. So a lot of that stuff is out the window because you're sort of starting again. So that's sort of interesting. How did people adjust to that, where they have a sort of understanding where they stand, or where they sit, I guess, relationship to everyone else, and now that's altered?
I think the answer is we'll find out.
Right, we're on the way. We're on the
Well,
way.
what I can say is, I very much, I think me and the team very much took the approach that we knew we needed to change. We knew the old way wasn't going to work to continue. So we really went with the 80-20 rule. I knew the logic made sense. I knew, and I think we all agreed that we believed we had covered most of the risk. We believed we had covered the disaster part of it, but we said go. We could have waited another 6 months to get it perfect, which I think probably a lot more people would have felt more comfortable with, try to, knock down every single thing, every single process and get it right from the beginning. But, me and the team just decided, okay, no, it's better to go, because even if we wait 6 months, well, it'll still won't be perfect and it'll still be chaos. So to answer your question more directly, I think for at least 3 months it was absolute chaos. Because they were trying to learn a new methodology, because we really do use the Agile methodology, the Scrum Masters, all the sort of lingo that you get nowadays, but we actually do use it. And getting used to sort of the hierarchies, I think, was probably difficult as well as the functional thinking. So the thing is, in these teams now, you have the brand person, you have the, you have the insights person, you have the analytics, you have the trade representative, trade meaning the field force sort of side. All together, and how they feel about the hierarchies, I'm not sure yet.
It reminds me a bit like, I imagine this is the case, like when they build things like Maseratis, it's a team of people build the car together, as opposed to an assembly line of, I just put in this part and the next one comes and I put the same part in. So that's sort of handmade, almost handmade, isn't it? And so I guess when you talk about people adjusting to that, I can imagine that they're thinking, I know in my own experience, if you want to get an audit of what could go wrong, Japanese teams are brilliant in telling you everything that's going to go wrong. Like they just flush out every possible thing, and this is going to be a problem, and you suddenly got this massive list of things to go through. But as you say, I guess at some point, it never ends. It just keeps going on forever. You never get anything done, so you've got to break through. So I mean, you don't have to answer this question if you don't want to, but for some people, was it too much? Was it like, I can't deal with this change, it's too revolutionary for me, it's not really what I signed on for, because I like the old days, I could measure with 1%, I knew exactly what we were doing, I liked the hierarchy, I was at the top of it, by the way. Did you find that some people voted with their feet and said, nah, this is really not for me anymore?
I would say there was certainly a group of people who feel like that, and probably did feel like that. There wasn't sort of a massive exodus of people going out after, but there was certainly feedback. You do the normal company surveys about, the tone of the organization. I think the weakest sort of, we changed it in April. The survey was probably done in July or August. So we're still
the worst possible time.
Still going through all the, the teething problems. And even though we sold it as, because I remember saying very specifically to the teams that, look, we know this is 80%. We know it's not right. I remember putting up pictures of, a shaky train ride. And I said, this is how it's going to feel for the next 3-4 months to get there. And, even with those sorts of things, one, I think that made people think you were sloppy. There's a group who thought it is interesting. There's another group within the population here who thought that's just sloppy. But we just went with it. Because to me, if you were going to make the change quickly, you had to do it. And I think there's certainly a big group of people who, to this day, will tell you that we don't plan it out well.
Right.
Or that there's too much change at one time.
Right.
And by the way, this is not the last change, so it's sort of a continual thing. So I think there's a group who've really embraced it and who love it. Mm-hmm. And there's a group who certainly are still not comfortable, and we did lose some as well. But, not to sound brutal about it, but in some ways we had to change. And if you expect a job here now that is going to be exactly the same for the next 15, 20 years, it's not going to happen anymore. Yeah.
And how did you go about, before I ask the question about engagement, I remembered I was going to ask you about, did you think to say to headquarters, we're not going to do the survey in Japan this year, we'll do it next year, and not coalesce a survey on satisfaction or engagement or whatever it is that you have at this peak time of revolutionary change? Did you think to yourself, no, we'll just pause that and we'll give ourselves a year and then let's do the survey next year? Because you're actually 3 months, you said, and in July, let me see, April, May, June, bingo, July, right? It's right at the peak. So did that thought not occur to you? Or could you get away with doing that and say, let's delay it?
Yeah, I mean, one, I'm not sure if I could have gotten away with it. We did consider it. At the same time, I thought, it's a good survey. You get a lot of sort of written, feedback as well. And in the end, I wanted to hear it. Do you know what I mean? I think in the end, good or bad, I wanted to hear what was coming through. We also had the project team doing regular surveys with the people that were impacted. But fundamentally, I wanted to know. And honestly, and I have said this to the organization as well, this is not the last one. Do you know what I mean? This is part of the, to really get to where we want to be, meaning we'll have, not just the current things we sell, but more things as we move to sort of more and more harm reduced or zero harm sorts of products into the future. Managing it in the old way simply won't work.
And what about engaging the team to embrace it? I mean, I take it that, there's always going to be some who are early adopters and will go for it. And then you've got a broad mass who are not, and they're conservative and they're cautious and they're checking it out, trying to determine where they fit into the hierarchy now. But in terms of actually getting people to engage with it and encourage them, as you say, it's a step out of your comfort zone activity, and you now got accountability as well as empowerment, which most Japanese workers just don't care much about being accountable. And so that's a combination of some fairly big changes in how things work. What were you doing? What things did you use to engage them? Were you doing town halls? Were you doing small groups, having lunches with people? I mean, how did you do it? How did you approach it?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of a number of different things. So, one, I think, in one of your questions that I read in advance, it's about how do you change the culture generally? Like, how do you enable some of these changes? And, one thing for me is to make this kind of change, and to get that engagement, you have to get people comfortable that they're in a safe zone if something doesn't work well. And I personally like a very casual culture, by the way I am. And I also, don't think it's helpful in, say, this boardroom for somebody to present to us and get beaten up. I don't think it helps. So for me, a lot of it was, getting that engagement. One was getting them comfortable with big changes. The team that ran the change we did in April, I sort of constantly said to them, guys, it's 80% right. Don't worry. If something doesn't go wrong at the beginning, we'll fix it. And giving that sort of massive safe space where it became okay. We know it's not going to be perfect. We don't have to worry about telling James or the rest of the senior team if it's not right. The main thing is let's get it right in 6-7 months. And even then, it's not going to be perfect. So that was one big part about getting the engagement. And I think if you do it, then they set it to the next team down too. So there's teams that were impacted by the change who used to work in a very standard way, who are making it up. as they go along, based on a methodology with clear objectives. But there was never a point in time, no roadmap, and we were not going to hammer them for not doing it right the first time. Okay, if you do the same thing wrong, exactly the same 6 times in a row, okay, there's going to be something.
I read this story about Lee Iacocca when he was running Chrysler, that one of his guys in charge of marketing, they launched this car, it didn't sell, it was a disaster, it lost $5 million or something on the process, and the guy's called up to his office, the guy's terrified, right? America, lost $5 million, you know what's going to happen, it's going to be, you're gone, right? And the guy said, I suppose you're going to fire me. And Iacocca says, fire you? We just spent $5 million educating you. And when I heard that story, I thought, wow, what a great leader, because to give people the comfort to try something new, to know that you're supported, to know that you can make mistakes because you see it as an educative process as opposed to a punishment process. Yeah. And being consistent with that, because often companies will say that, we're, very expansive here and we have challenges and you screw up somehow and next thing, whack, you get belted by the organization. And everyone observes that. People aren't stupid, they watch, well, these guys, they didn't do that well. What happened to them? And when they see that nothing happened to them and they just recalibrated and tried a different way, that gives a lot of people confidence that they can believe what you, as the leader, is saying. And I guess that's important, isn't it, in Japan, I think, particularly when people are not used to stepping out of that comfort zone so often. Yeah.
No, I think it's hugely important anywhere, but I think particularly in Japan, the first, Japanese employee who gets humiliated in the boardroom, you will get nobody else doing it for the next 10 years, is my view.
I agree.
I think that's the same for anyone, though, by the way. I don't really like a culture of fear. And to me, I've been in one of these sorts of roles now for 11, 12 years, here, Denmark, as well as Sri Lanka for a bit. And the one thing that I think the one thing as a leader that you underestimate when you first do the job, because everyone got into this job by being good at something, right? Being a good marketing person. I happen to have a strategy background from consulting days and everything like that. But once you get into this job, it's not about that anymore. You have people to do that. I mean, yes, you have to do the strategy, but generally you don't do the day-to-day. And the thing you underestimate is your real difference is the tone you set. The real difference you make, it takes 2-3 years, but the place starts to work like you. If you panic all the time, your team panics all the time. If you beat people up in the meeting, they will probably over time start doing it to their teams. And the fear of coming in and saying something wrong will permeate everywhere. And to me, that's one of the things in my role, because I don't, the funny thing about this job is you actually don't do anything by old terms when you're coming up through the ranks. But what you can do is really set that environment that, if you want innovation, you have to let people fail. If you want empowerment, you need people to want to take it because it's a good thing and they feel proud of it and they're not fearful of failing every day. Yes, you want to set standards and you want people to achieve, but at the same time, my sort of view of it is that, my job is to set that tone and to make sure my team sets that tone as well.
And this often is great at your level, right? And often the problem is probably the layers below you. Yeah. Because you've got religion about failure's fine if we learn from it, and we're going to tolerate mistakes because this is a revolutionary process we're going through here. There's no roadmap. We don't know which parts are going to work and which parts aren't going to work, and I'm okay with that. But the people below you who maybe don't have that same necessarily mindset, how do you as the leader permeate that down to them and give them the power and the encouragement to replicate what you're doing at the top down to the person at the bottom? Because you often say that the youngest female, and I choose female intentionally because it's usually in most companies, the hierarchy is the women are at the bottom and the youngest is at the bottom. So that if you pick on the youngest female, does she feel empowered? Does she feel I can make a mistake and it's a learning process as opposed to I'm going to get scolded by my boss? So how do you drive that ethos through the ranks of the organization?
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't know if today, if you asked me that question, could I confidently say that person feels very empowered? I don't know. Honestly, I couldn't tell. COVID hasn't helped since I haven't met most of them.
Yeah.
Since we haven't had people in the office for
Yeah,
quite
that's
a long
right.
time.
Your timing is terrific.
Yeah, making all these changes. By the way, that big change we did was with 20% of the people in the office, and one of the biggest waves of COVID. So it was interesting.
Yeah.
And doing agile, the whole idea is you have a lot of people in the room brainstorming, and instead you're on Teams. It's not quite the same thing. But sorry, I got a bit off there. But to me, like I said, it takes a few years. One, what I have under my direct control is who I pick in my team.
Mm-hmm.
So one of my big jobs is, I want a team that, is going to operate in that way. Completely different personalities. I want the creative person. I want the hard-nosed finance. I want all those different characteristics. But from a management style, I think I really look for, I can compromise on technical expertise because they can learn that, or they can surround themselves with other people. What I'm not willing to compromise on my team is people with no EQ or who are going to create problems within their team. So that's sort of step one for me, is pick that team that you trust to be able to drive it, less from a content point of view, but from a style point of view, in my view, that enables that, right? And who doesn't tolerate the same kind of behavior, right? And I think one of the mechanisms we did, I just got my team together with the second tier as well. We said, okay, how do we want it to work?
Right.
If we succeed in this, how should it feel as an organization? And we just sort of talked about it actually at one of the big events we had at the beginning of the year, which happened to be online because it came right in the middle of Omicron.
Yeah.
But that was sort of my mechanism to push it down. And no, it wasn't sort of a, to me doing, we thought about, okay, how do could we measure people? Could we have KPIs? Then you realize you're doing exactly the opposite of what you really want. It's to drive more of that behavior of empowerment, allowing people to try things out. And, if it doesn't go right, as long as it was, reasonably thought out and not the fourth time you've done it, then it's okay.
If you want to be successful as a leader, do the Leadership Training for Managers course. All companies need people who can both manage and lead. Leading people screams out for real skills in communication, dealing with all different types of people, being excellent at innovation, planning, delegation, handling mistakes, doing performance reviews really well, and inspiring and motivating the team. Do the Leadership Training for Managers course now in either Japanese or English. Are you doing business with Japan? Do you really know how things work? Japan Business Mastery provides the answers. Do you have the right networks and know how to create them? Do you know how to get on the same wavelength with Japanese buyers? Do you know what being trustworthy looks like from the Japanese perspective? Japan Business Mastery is based on more than 30 years' experience in Japan and will become your go-to guide. Want to succeed in Japan? Buy Japan Business Mastery now. So, you're down about 700 now, right, I believe?
Yeah.
So if you think about that, sometimes leaders will parachute themselves down into the bottom ranks and spend time with the people at the bottom, engage the pulse, I mean, I think it's happening up here. Is it actually happening down here? Do you do that, or do you just continuously work through your command line?
No, I do both. So, probably 4 times a week. I have different people from different parts of the organization, generally at least 2 or 3, sort of structural tiers, below. And essentially I just ask for feedback.
Right.
So literally it's 4 a week, I think, that I do now. We kind of have a list that the whole team does it. We agreed as one of the things we wanted to do to make sure we were, 1, doing the right thing, 2, have a pulse, make sure we're not missing anything big, is that the entire team, we agreed as a team to do this. So I do that. And then I also do things like with we call them squads, the teams in the Agile. I've sat into their meetings every once in a while to see how it's working, ask them if there's anything you need from us, what's not working. So yeah, pretty regular basis we sort of parachute in. I haven't been to the field in a long time just because of COVID. I used to go quite often, but now I think we'll probably start doing it again now.
So when you're having those, 4 a week, is this like 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, an hour? How long do you spend, generally speaking, with the team?
I mean, they're generally booked for about a half an hour.
Half an hour,
But some of them go longer, some of them go shorter.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. And also, I'm interested that your own direct reports are doing the same things. It's sort of like the many pebbles in the pond, isn't it?
Yeah.
That the ripples really
Yeah.
getting out through the organisation. Yeah, that sounds great. And in terms of innovation, because you've said, okay, right, we're going to innovate here. Have things actually turned out that that structure that you thought about mixing up the different representative groups into a new team and thinking about how we can plot a path going forward? Have you found that's paid dividends? Have you found that people have actually gone maybe beyond your expectations, or have gone beyond what you were sort of thinking they would get to something higher than that, or not as far as you thought, or how's it worked out?
I think it's gone probably a bit beyond what I expected.
That's great.
Because a lot of the teams, when they were put into it, they were very, very uncomfortable. And then they realized they could do it. The two examples I can think of is, the team that actually manages the old business, meaning the cigarette business. When we made this change, they're working in that similar way, but the headcount in that team was down by about 35%. And rather than being the team that felt forgotten and being, sort of unhappy about the situation, they just made it up, and they innovated in a different way. They've had the best year that we've had, in probably history of BAT. Actually, we're the highest share that we've ever been in that business. They have, because of their ability to do it, and they had everybody, right? So they had, because they weren't making decisions for the brand only or for for another part, the cost side of the business. They did it themselves, and they have delivered fantastic results. They have they run it like their own mini business now. So they know the financials. They do everything together, and they've made up the process by themselves. So that was one where it's not sort of a product innovation, but they've innovated on the way they work. And to me, honestly, it's something that the whole group in BAT should start following, because it's a nice commercially driven, but consumers as well put in. And I think the second one is we have a team that does the heated tobacco products for Korea. And they did a launch of one of our devices in Korea, which is called Pro Slim. We just launched it here as well. And the team, essentially did the entire campaign themselves. From the bottom up, probably one of the best campaigns I've ever seen. And, my reflection of why I liked it so much is my marketing director had no idea. They had given general consumer insights. They said, this is what we want. This is your target. Within these brand guidelines, you go crazy. And the team did it, really with almost no guidance from this unit team other than the general principles, spend, those sorts of things. So it's much, much better than I expected.
Well, that's great. And one of the things, too, is, when people are succeeding,
Yep.
Normally in the sort of structure, in the old structure, you sort of go up in, go up in the next job, and then the next job and the next job. Well, suddenly you're now in some sort of circular free-for-all here of everyone's doing everything together, combining. How do people now have a sense of progression in the company? How do you go up in the company? How do you stand out when it's really a collegiate effort and it's a team effort to come up with the combination of things? It's not you individually showing your expertise or your effort or your capability as an individual.
Yeah. I think to be clear, although they work in these, these, we call them the squads again. I always do a circle because that's the way we always look at it from a structural point of view. The individual team members still belong to a function.
Oh, okay.
Right. So there is someone in that team whose main job is the brand part.
Right.
There is somebody whose main part is the digital activation. There is somebody whose main job is the data and analytics. But day to day, they only work with this team, and they have one goal, and they're measured on that squad goal. But functionally, they still have a home. So there is somewhere to move up. Yeah.
Do they have like metrics reporting to the brand leader as opposed? They're in their squad.
Yeah. So they report to the squad, but they have a matrix into their functional head. Yeah.
Dotted line to the functional head.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's almost like you've brought an international conglomerate mechanism to an internal team.
There are many businesses, is the way I kind of look at it. The guy who runs the squad is sort of a mini general manager of a
Right.
business with a goal, but they have all the resources they need
Right.
within the team. But to tell the truth, on your initial question, that's one of our biggest pain points that we need to figure out now is how to do the career paths.
Yeah.
Because it's very, very different from the way BAT worked. It was slow, but at the same time, your career path, you can almost plot out from
Yeah.
the beginning all the way through. And I think with this structure, it's much more difficult to do because we've delayered. So there's no more, now you're probably going to do 2, 3 in one technical grade level, then move up, and then move up one more time, So it is one of the things that we need to look at because I think people are a bit confused and for good reason. We've sorted out some of it, but not all of it now.
And I mean, in terms of recognition and thinking about remuneration as well, do teams, for example, get rewarded financially and the team shares it? Because in the old system, James, you're doing a good job, you're going to get a bonus. So-and-so is not doing such a great job, get maybe a smaller bonus or maybe no bonus. I don't know how it used to work, but in my company, that's how it works. But now it's actually a collective way of working. So are the bonuses evenly distributed? Are people able to be recognised on top of that for good work? Or how do you do that?
Yeah, I think from a general compensation and bonus point of view, we still do it at a corporate level.
Right.
We follow sort of the group. We're on a group bonus, so the actual metrics are identical for everyone in the group, including for here. But we have just our specific numbers that we need to deliver. We looked at trying to do it a different way, but honestly, the way we do these squads is every quarter we rebalance. So if it's not working quite as well here, we either give you more money, change your target, move it somewhere else, all those sorts of things. So, when we realize when we're doing it by squad, you end up locking people in.
All right.
Do you know what I mean? And then you don't have that flexibility to rebalance to hit the big goal.
Right.
So in that sense, we haven't changed anything. At the same time, we have a lot of other sort of smaller recognition and reward things. So we call them like the Ethos Awards or Battlefield bonuses. So if a single team
What was
does
the first one called?
we call them Ethos Awards because there's a
Ethos.
Yeah, so there's a
Ethos
company
Awards.
Ethos.
Okay.
It's bold, empowered.
Oh, okay. Right,
diverse, all
right,
these
right,
sorts of
right,
things.
right.
And for people who are really exhibiting it, in a certain way, we have money set aside for different awards and recognition. That go through the year. So anytime when somebody does something exceptional. And then we also have what we call battlefield bonus. These are sort of the bigger awards, sort of a month's salary, 2 months' salary for people who really, really, really went over the top or teams that went over the top. So we manage it more that way to give sort of the individual teams recognition or individuals recognition. But the big bonus is still corporate level because we need that flexibility to make sure we can rebalance the investments over the year.
Yeah.
And their targets. Their targets change by quarter. We have a plan for a quarter. This is what you want in terms of this consumer group. If you're doing really well, obviously we raise it up. If you're not doing quite as well, we either change the investment levels or rebalance to other parts of the different consumer groups. Yeah.
So it sounds like culturally, you've sort of created a huge entrepreneur culture here, from what I'm hearing.
That's the idea.
And I mean, how is that coming along? I mean, because I'm presuming that if you're motivated and you're ambitious, you take people out of that hierarchical structure and you make it more based in these squads, that people who really want to push hard and take risks and drive the organisation can really stand out. So, and that suits people who've got that entrepreneur mindset.
Yeah.
And so are you finding that? Are you finding you've started realising we've got a lot of good entrepreneurs here. We didn't see them before, but now we see them.
I'm hoping so. I'm seeing more and more. I don't, it's been a year, so I can't say we've changed the world in a year. What I can say is there are people who are really standing out, who really enjoy this way of working and have taken to it. And they're the ones also that are pushing for the next thing. Do you know what I mean? So if there's something that's not working, they're the ones who are changing it or asking to change it. And like I said, the good thing is now they have kind of the ability to do it. I mean, they still, I won't say we work perfectly and there's no hierarchy and they don't come. I think at the beginning, the hardest part was to get them to not try to present it to us. So if there was any major decision, they kept, not necessarily to me, but to say, we have what we call the marketing leadership team. So there's, the next tier down. And the teams were never comfortable making a decision without going there.
Right.
So that was probably the biggest barrier. Now they don't.
Okay.
And plus that team has also said, we don't want to see that. That's your job.
Right.
This stuff, the big things, big investment numbers, big risk, yes, we need to see, but the day-to-day execution,
You don't need air cover from us.
Yeah.
You can go for it.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
But have we created, a huge, huge innovation everywhere? In some places, yes, some places, no. But I think, fundamentally in the end, it depends on the people there. And I think, one thing about BAT that's probably different than most Japanese companies I know, and we try to recruit based on this, is that, because we are probably much more foreigner heavy than any other international. I know some of the guys who run, and they are all guys, by the way, who run some of the other multinationals in Japan, and they tend to have, 3-4 expats on an entirely Japanese organization. BAT is, very, very unique in that there's a huge foreigner population, not all expats, but foreigners who we've hired here. And also at our junior ranks, I mean, just looking at some of the people in the room, they are the outlier Japanese, meaning the ones who have lived in the U.S. or are, half Japanese American, and we actually recruit that way as well. And we're a good sized company, but in Japan we're a small company. Yeah, there are massive companies in Japan. So if we try to recruit on the same thing as everyone else, we'll fail. So a lot of it are, I kind of said, look, let's just be proud of being the outlier company. If you want to come to BAT, leave Japan without leaving Japan.
Leave Japan without leaving Japan.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
If you ever saw it full here, you'd be for a Japanese, for a company based in Japan, you would be really surprised at how many foreigners or Japanese who really speak, very, very fluent English there are in the company. And it feels different from that sense. And then it also helps, I think, my view is it's an interesting way to lead in Japan because you instantly have sort of that cohort of people that are more, Western, willing to make change. You have a Japanese cohort that's in the middle. Then you have the field force, which is more traditional Japanese, who you try and bring them along. And the hardest thing is not to create a split. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's a good point. I mean, we talk about diversity and inclusion, right? And in Japan, most of the time, diversity and inclusion is gender as opposed to nationality based. But it sounds like you've actually got probably a mixture of both. You've got a more international team, but also that gender diversity as well inside the company.
Yeah, I mean, in my senior team, out of the there's 7 of us in the senior team. 3 are female. We used to have 4, but now it's 3. So we had 50%, but now it's not. And then I think at a second tier level as well, I mean, we're well above the national average, I think, in terms of females in senior management roles, as well as I'm sure in terms of nationalities. 20 nationalities.
Oh, 20 nationalities.
Yeah.
20 nationalities. Okay.
Yeah.
20 nationalities in Japan. I think you can be pretty happy with that.
Yeah.
There's not too many companies.
Yeah.
You look around outside this window here who's going to be saying we've got 20 nationalities in our company. That's pretty amazing. And in terms of, if you're going to give some advice to someone who is coming to Japan for the first time, they have been sent to Japan to run the organization. They don't speak Japanese. They don't know much about Japan. They may not even been to Japan until this point. What would be some advice you'd give them?
I'd probably say a few things. I say one, I would advise them, there's plenty of books about doing, business in Japan. And I think there's elements of it that are very true, some of the stereotypical things. So there are some of the formalities that you need to go through, which from somebody coming in from the outside is very strange. What I call sort of the bowing meetings where you don't actually talk business. It's all about, saying those 2 things that the teams are allowed to then run if the 2 tops run. Listen to that sort of thing. Listen to a lot of the cultural things. Try to learn how to read what's a real yes and what's not a real yes in the way people react. learn some of those signs. Don't overassume on some of the other stereotypes. Just like any other culture, there are some people who fit the stereotype of conservative, averse to change, very processed, that sort of stereotype. There are those people, but there's also a big, big group who are not. And the final thing I would say is, if you're brought here, you're probably here to make some change. Find that group of locals or staff yourself with enough foreigners to help you out who are willing to push it a little bit. Because if you're going to make it, you just need a small group to do it. And if you succeed once, I think you end up with the next time you do it, that team who succeeded. So my example is the team who did the big change, and we're going through another one now. The first time they were very, very worried about making those changes. Now they're pushing it further than even I am asking them to do. So to a new person, pay attention to all the cultural things. Pay attention to the business culture. Pay attention to how to read the reactions of the Japanese, and don't expect big rah-rahs. But at the same time, don't let it be the restraint. Build your group of people, foreigners, locals that are open to change, and be willing to push them into a little bit of the discomfort zone. Because one thing I think in some of my other friends I know who are running different companies here, if I talk to any of them about some of the mistakes they've made, is they've listened too much almost. Because there's always that group of people who say, oh, you can't do it that way. It doesn't work that way here. You can't do it. And there's always...
The clients won't like it.
Yeah, there's always a truth to it, but there's always a little bit of, we just don't want to change the way. So you got to find that nice barrier and not go to the things that they're really, really right about, but be willing to push it a little bit and push the team into a bit of a comfort zone. And then when you do that, you cover them. You cover them for what goes wrong.
But language, I don't know whether you've learned Japanese in the 3 years you've been here, but what do you think about learning Japanese? Is that relevant?
I think it would certainly help. I have not learned it. I have because I'm ethnically Japanese, I understand a lot. And I can read the basics. And I guess some of the cultural nuances were easier for me because I recognize it from the family. It would certainly help, I think, especially, this may sound a bit strange, and you can tell me if I should edit this later. But, in some ways it's better to be full gaijin learning Japanese because you get credit for anything you do. Yeah. I think for me, in the few attempts I've made, because I'm ethnically Japanese, you probably don't get the same bit of leeway.
There's more expectation maybe,
Yeah, expectation to do it right. And honestly, I was really trying to learn it at the beginning, but I realized, especially with some of our Japanese, colleagues outside of BAT, I'm almost better off being a full gaijin because then I don't make the mistakes. When I make the cultural mistakes, it's okay. I don't know. That's kind of a cop-out, I guess, for not learning Japanese, but that's sort of what I've observed. If I could learn it all, I mean, I feel, kind of ashamed that I didn't learn it in my 8 years of Japanese school my parents put me through.
Right, okay.
But,
back in California.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Well, the language part is always tricky, and I think, you're right. I mean, someone like me, Australian, speaking Japanese, it's not expected, right?
Yeah.
I don't look like I'm ethnically Japanese, so it doesn't have any impact on me in terms of pressure expectation.
Yeah.
I can understand in your case it would be like that. In terms of your definition of leadership, how would you define leadership?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think the way I think about it, and I've said it before in different contexts, I think a good leader doesn't create, this is sort of a term you've heard in a lot of places, but, good leaders don't create followers, they create leaders, yeah? And that's sort of the way I look at it. The thing now that I look back with sort of most of the pride is how many people have gone out to do great things that were on my teams, who, especially the ones who weren't quite, the ones who were thought of as the up-and-comers. So, I mean, last year we sent out 3 people to run, businesses like I do in other parts of BAT.
Oh, from Japan?
Who are working here in Japan. One is actually Japanese, who are now leading businesses in other parts of BAT, which I take, which to me is one of those things that, is a personal thing that I really am proud of.
That's a big achievement.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't really see that many cases of Japanese executives
Yeah.
who are portable. I use the word portable,
Yeah.
that you can say, okay, you're going to Europe and you're going to run our business in Europe, or you're going to South America, you're going to run the business there. And a good example of that is like you think about the number of hotels you've stayed in over the years, I'm sure around the world, 5-star hotels, right? You never meet a Japanese general manager. You never
true.
meet them.
It's true.
Plenty of Swiss, plenty of Europeans,
Yeah.
Americans, but I cannot even think of one Japanese I've ever met.
Yeah.
And yet, you've got all these 5-star hotels here, all these Japanese working in them. Where do they go, So if you've done that, well done to you. That's a
So
good
to be
achievement.
honest, there's only one who's technically
Well, that's
Japanese.
the first one, right?
Yeah.
That's the first one.
and by the way, he's a Japanese guy who grew up in Denmark, so
Okay.
but still,
Good
a
stuff,
Japanese national, yeah.
Good. And is there anything we've talked about a lot of things in leadership. Is there anything that we haven't discussed which we should talk about?
I guess to me, because I do a lot of sort of internal trainings and things like that. I think a few things that I always say to people is, one, you have to figure it out your way. There's, in BAT, a lot of, European company cultures or American companies. They've changed over time, but a lot of them, there is the big man culture, especially I think more in old European companies. Thing, the hierarchical boss, the tough guy, all of these sorts of things. And I think for a lot of our employees, and also culturally, people who are willing to get in other people's faces, have the big argument in the room, say the same thing somebody else said, in a different way and louder. You get a lot of that, I think, in different corporate boardrooms, not just in BAT, but in others. So my one thing I think as a leader is I could never do that. And it's something that I think probably early in my career, I thought I had to be like that to be one of the leaders. And the more senior you get, you realize, if you don't do it the way you're comfortable with, that's genuine, that people don't believe you're not faking, you're never going to get people to follow you in any way. So that's the one thing I would say is, really focus on, thinking about if you're going to be a leader, why would people follow you? What can you do in your authentic style that you come across as authentic to people, that will get people to follow you and to go in a way you would like them to go. But if sorry, that's a long-winded thing to say is do it your own way.
And a nice way to wrap it up too. So James, thank you very much. It's been a fascinating day. And so please join us again for our next episode of Japan's top business interviews.